morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming to the Casting and Color Race on Stage and Screen Symposium. I'm Catherine Kinney. I'm a faculty member in the English department. And I just want to briefly introduce my co-conveners. Okay, so Kimberly Guerrero, who is a professor of acting in the theater, television, and digital production department, and Donatella Galella, who I have to give full credit. This was her inspiration, and so I just want to give Donna a plug for her book, which came out this year from University of Iowa. It's called America in the Round: Capital, Race, and Nation at Washington D.C.'s Arena Stage. So, Donna.
Thank you so much, Catherine. All right. Hi, so I'm going to talk about the origins for this symposium, its purpose, and then do some thank yous before I hand it over to Professor Kimberly Guerrero. So again, hi, I'm Donatella Galella, and I've been thinking about this symposium for 4 years. It started with my initial contract negotiations for this job. And putting on this symposium was the one thing I successfully negotiated for, because I think that this conversation is so important, especially to host it at a university, and especially at this university where the student body is 85% of color, and we are so close to Los Angeles. And what has been terrific is that the timing of this symposium has coincided with other discourses like hashtag Oscars So White gaining more relevance, or at least more people thinking that this matters. So the purpose for me for this symposium is to bring together university scholars, industry artists, and UCR students, because I feel like those groups tend to have conversations about this, but not necessarily together. And I truly wanted this to be student-centered. And my hope is that we can all learn from each other with regards to our expertise and experiences. And I want us to think about casting as pedagogical, as teaching us something, as lessons that we then take outside of the theater or the movie theater. And to also think about casting as the distribution of roles and resources. So it is about representation, but it is also about different kinds of material inequality. So finally, I wanted to thank various folks, the Departments of English and Theater and Film and Digital Production for your support, and my colleagues for showing up today. Second, the Dean of our College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, the Center for Ideas in Society, and then various staff. From the Center for Ideas in Society, we have Catherine, Jessica, Renee, and Maggie, the Performing Arts Administration folks, Sarah, Neville, Kathy, Reese. From Communications, Jeff Sadiq, and the website was created by Kelvin Mack. For facilities and tech support, Brittany, and then our terrific student assistants, Jasmine, Javier, and Arabelle. So now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Kimberly Guerrero.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Dr. Galella, for inviting me to be a part of this with you. So my little part of our introduction is just to bring us into the room. I'm of Indigenous background and European background. I am enrolled Colville member from Washington State. My mom is Colville and Salish Kootenai, also she's from Montana. And I'm Cherokee on my father's side, along with some Czech and English and French thrown in there for good measure. And so I just want to take this time to acknowledge that the stories that have been told on this land that we're on for millennia belong to the Gabrielino, the Luiseño, the Serrano, the Tongva, and the Cahuilla. And it's very interesting that the land that we're on, actually they kind of all lay claim to in a really kind of sometimes loving and sometimes not way. It's so fun to be with my Indigenous colleagues here at UCR and hear them talking about that. But just to kind of honor where we've been and the stories that have been told here in our past. And I also just want to honor the stories of everyone here and everyone that's watching through the recording. So if we could just take a second, just you can close your eyes. And we're just going to center ourselves in the room. I'd like you to take a deep breath in. And hold it for a couple of seconds, and then breathe out. And then one more in and out. And I'd like for you to think back to a time hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. Just go back and find a relative. Go back and find an ancestor. And I just want you to imagine their story. And then think about the journey that life has taken, that breath has taken to get all the way to today, and you, and that circle of breath that's been happening. And then I want you to think about the kinds of stories that are being told and the kinds of stories that you want to be told in the future, which is why we're gathered here today. And take one more deep breath in. And a breath out. And with that, we just say that we're so grateful to be here together. Grateful for the land that we all live upon and are gathered upon today. And grateful for the stories that have been told, that are being told right now, and that will be told in the future. And open your eyes. Thank you so much. So I'd love to invite the first panelist up. And I will introduce them. Thank you, friends. You can take your coffee. This is important. Yeah, it is. You got it? However you land is perfect.
This is an order of wisest.
I should be at the end. So I'm thrilled to be hosting the part of our symposium that is really focused on the on-the-ground producers, directors, actors that are out there, and getting kind of some feedback from what you all are seeing, what you're passionate about right now, what's maybe bugging you right now. You're like, is there time for that? But also let's talk about both the challenges and the victories, kind of what you've seen, or really whatever's on your heart. And I'm going to give a brief bio of each, and then we'll just get right to it. I'd like for each of you to talk about kind of those things so that we can then spend the lion's share of our time this morning really interacting with you all and really coming together as a consortium talking about kind of what interests us. So let's do this in order. So DeLanna, I'm going to have you speak first. DeLanna Studi is my Cherokee sister over here from Oklahoma. She recently starred in the world premiere of Emily Mann's new play, Gloria, A Life, directed by Diane Paulus at the Darrell Roth Theater. Her theater credits include the first national Broadway tour of Tony Award and Pulitzer Prize-winning play August Osage County, Off-Broadway's Informed Consent, and regional theaters, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Portland Center Stage, Cornerstone, and Indiana Repertory Theater. DeLanna originated roles in over 18 world premieres. She wrote and performed And So We Walked, based on retracing her family's footsteps along the Trail of Tears with her father. And So We Walked was produced at Triad Stage, Portland Center Stage, and tours this fall, which we're thrilled about. DeLanna received the 2016 MAP Fund grant, the Cherokee Preservation Foundation grant, and the Autry National Center's Butcher Scholar Award. Her TV credits include Dreamkeeper, Edge of America, Shameless, General Hospital, and Z Nation, and she serves as the chair of SAG-AFTRA's National Native Committee. So please welcome DeLanna Studi.
Osio, Dadawado, Delanagay, Deanne, Carol Chun, Studi Kaywood, Shi Chalagi, Aya, Oklahoma. Hi, my name is DeLanna Studi. I'm a proud citizen of the Cherokee Nation from Oklahoma. And Wado, thank you for letting me speak with you today. Thank you, Kimberly, for letting me be here. Oh my goodness. Basically, my career path started with, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. In literally the middle of nowhere. We're the only town in that state that has regressed. We used to have a post office. They have taken it away, and they've separated us now into two different groups. So some of us have joined a different postal unit. But we're the only people that have slowly gone smaller. And, you know, just to give you some insight about my background, my father is full-blood Cherokee. He's what is considered an old speaker, which means his first language is Cherokee. He's also a survivor of the boarding school system. My mother is German-Irish, so I always joke that I kind of grew up with divorced parents. So one weekend I would spend with my mom going to church, and the other weekend I would go to stomp grounds with my father. So I grew up in between the worlds. But one great thing about my Cherokee side is that we're matrilineal, and women always had power. And so it was instilled in me in a very young age that I was supposed to be a woman warrior, because the Cherokees also have those. And so my father taught me to be a warrior. And part of the way you are a warrior is by learning your history, learning your culture, and then sharing that with the world. And so my father has a great sense of humor. If you were to translate my name, DeLanna is the Cherokee word for golden or yellow. And Studi, which was our original last name before the Trail of Tears, Studi means keeper of the gate. When my father was sent to boarding school, they shortened it to Studi, and Studi just means gate or door. So we always jokingly say, my Uncle Wes is how you say cat. So Wes's name is Cat Door. But my name, and my father is very clever, is Golden Gate. And it only took me 20 years to figure that out. And I asked him about it. I was like, Papa, did you name me after a bridge? And he's like, well, that's what you are. And so that's my destiny was written for me by my father. And I've tried to live up to that as much as I can. Growing up in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, I never saw people like me on stage or screen. And when I did, I was always a period piece, and our women were not warriors. Our women had no voice. They were always being raped or murdered or victimized, or we were exotified like some creature behind a museum glass. But it was something that it did not feel right to me, because that's not what I knew. They were not my aunties or my grandmas. And the first time that changed for me was my father had bought this used VHS copy at a Blockbuster when it was going out of business. And it was of the movie Thunderheart. And Thunderheart had Sheila Tousey in it, and Sheila was playing a contemporary Native American woman. And she was powerful, and she was strong, and she wasn't afraid to use her voice. And that's when I realized that's the first time I felt validated by seeing someone that looked like me on stage or screen. And after that, I began telling stories. I moved out to Los Angeles. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to share our stories. But when I moved to Los Angeles, that was the first time I had an identity crisis. In Oklahoma, people knew who I was. My culture was never questioned. Out here, it was not uncommon to go to an audition and people say, oh, you're Native? Oh, how much? And that was just always startling to me, because in Oklahoma, you're Cherokee. It doesn't matter what your blood quantum is, but out here, for some reason, that really mattered. And that bothered me, because now it's usually a person who is not Native asking those questions, and so they're invalidating my experience and asking me to justify my own identity. And that always set me on edge. And so I decided then that I could either keep complaining about the situation, or I can make changes from the inside. And so I became chair of the SAG-AFTRA National Native Americans Committee. And so we are creating policy change. We actually had a 4-hour meeting this last week where we're talking about rewording the contract so that our people are being seen the way we want to be seen and using the language that we want to use to describe us. And along the same lines, I was very frustrated with the auditions I was having, because I felt like every audition I had, I'd have to sacrifice my culture or my gender identity. And both of those are very important to me. And I felt I was doing a disgrace to both my tribe and my gender just by going to these auditions. And so out of that frustration, it was that moment again, I can either complain about it and just bemoan the fact that I am not getting the roles that I want, or I can seize my power as a Cherokee woman and create my own roles. And so that's why I wrote And So We Walked. So that's my story.
Thank you. Don't worry, we'll get to it. You guys will be able to ask your questions and kind of get into dialogue with DeLanna about all that. Snehal Desai, is the producing artistic director of the East West Players, the nation's largest Asian American theater company and one of the longest running theaters of color in the country. He's directed plays at venues from the Old Globe in San Diego to Boom Arts in Portland, Oregon to the Old Vic in London, and worked more than in a dozen theaters in New York City. Desai is also a member of the Asian Pacific American Media Coalition and serves on the board of the Consortium of Asian American Theaters and Artists and Theater Communications Group. He was previously the Associate Artistic Director and Literary Manager at East West Players. Desai has also served as Resident Director of Theatre Emory, participated in the Lincoln Center Directors Lab, and was a Literary Fellow with London's Royal Shakespeare Company. A Soros Fellow and the recipient of a TAN Award, Desai was in the inaugural class of Theater Communications Group Spark Leadership Program. He was also the inaugural recipient of the Drama League's Classical Directing Fellowship. Snehal is on the faculty of USC's graduate program in Arts Leadership, where he teaches executive arts leadership. Snehal is a graduate of Emory University and received his MFA in directing from the Yale School of Drama. Slacker.
Yeah, Asian slacker.
Touche.
I'm going to just share, talking to you and Donatella, you kind of wanted, you said boots on the ground. So I kind of went to my notes on the field. So I kind of just wanted to share kind of the 15 kind of bullet points I often share with artists who are coming to East West Players, the next generation of artists that I encounter in training programs and also that are just coming through our theater. So I would definitely say there's a shift coming, as we mentioned, movements like Gold Opening, and also a need to reach international audiences with the work. So I'll talk about the work in kind of the film realm and then in theater. The other thing that's really interesting is a splintering of audiences with so many avenues for consumption, which is what we were talking about, that nowadays it's not just the 4 main networks. Now you have hundreds of channels and then the streaming sites. And they really, now audiences are now, it's not about a 20 share, it's about a 0.8 share. So you just are trying to reach 1 million people with your show. So it's not trying to reach the broadest audience. And so that has led networks and executives and marketing folks who are often not creative to be like, oh, I don't know how to do this, but I do know how to reach a Chinese audience or a Chinese American audience, or I know where they are. So that actually in some ways has allowed for diversity in the field in a different way. Some of the things that we talk about is that if you want to be intentionally inclusive these days, you need to be specific in your casting notices and your visions, right? So just saying it's like multicultural or you'll cast diverse does not mean anything because then the default will be white, you know what I mean? Yes. So I think if you are a director, if you're a writer or a producer and you want to see diversity in your work, the only way to ensure it is to write it in. Fear drives most things, so those that are unknown, those that are different than you, and then now the new thing is of doing it wrong. So I think you have to kind of identify what is the fear that is motivating, right? Is it a fear, is it xenophobia, or is it fear of I want to be an ally, but I don't know if I'm using the right language or if I'm doing it right, which allows us to serve or interact with those individuals in different ways. You want to be an ally to those who want to push change, and you want to push them lovingly, but you also want to tell them, you want to be frank and truthful, right? You have to be in a relationship where you can also say, this is not right, or this is making me uncomfortable, or this is not allowing me to be seen and heard. And be a thorn in the side of those who would rather you didn't exist because they didn't want you here anyway, so you might as well just upset them all you want. There's been a really big change in terminology. So even for me coming of age now, from colorblind to color conscious, right? I think the terminology keeps evolving, which is very, very interesting. And some of that is now we're at a place where you should just create terminology that works for you and define it that way. You know, one of the things that I often talk about is people ask, well, what do you want, right? And by me, I'm suddenly, you know, we're all speaking collectively for all people of color, or people of ethnicity. And what we want is to be seen and heard, right, as we are, and acknowledged in those ways. That's kind of the simplest way to sometimes put that. And so sometimes it's saying that kind of the colonial framework of naming things or existing is not what's working for me. So let me define the narrative in a different way. Power. So power for writers, right? People often are like, well, where does the power lie, right? Who's going to change the field? Is it writers? Is it directors? Is it artistic directors? Is it producers? Is it showrunners? And for me, it's everyone. Everyone has power and agency in the field, right? So actors say they never have agency, but they do. They can choose to take a project or not, right? If at some point all Asian American artists stopped accepting roles in Miss Saigon will not exist, right? And so, but we have to, so then sometimes the power is in the individual, and then sometimes it's collective power, and how we organize and bring it. But the thing of, I don't have agency, I don't have power in the situation, I don't believe it. I do think, though, right now we live in a time where writers have a tremendous amount of influence and are often able to bring a lot of folks into the door. But I still think if you're a head of an institution, or a showrunner or an exec, you also have tremendous influence and impact to kind of dictate the terms. Numbers don't lie, so data needs to back up stories and anecdotes and pronouncements. It's initially how we measure change, right? So people are like, well, numbers mean quotas. No, well, guess what? You know, one of the interesting movements lately has been this show us your writer's room, right? I don't know if you heard about this. And then I don't know if you heard how quickly it was silenced or how quickly it disappeared, because people were really afraid to show pictures of their writers' rooms because it was primarily, particularly some of these networks like HBO, it was primarily, you know, older white men, SNLs. You know what I mean? There's certain writers' rooms that are very afraid to show who they are. And so who's in front of the screen and who's behind the screen matters as much as who's in front of it. And that's important. There's still prejudices against culturally specific institutions by predominantly white institutions. So I don't know if this is the best example, but I often talk about what happens when you think of BET versus when you think about the Hallmark Channel, right? When you think about East West Players versus you think about Center Theater Group. Somehow, right, because there's money, right? Money does not translate obviously into artistry or quality or impact, but there somehow has been ingrained that, oh, these are the places I want to work, or these places are good. And what these other places do is very niche. Criticism is often the furthest behind. My big thing right now is I want there to be a review about an Asian American show that is not compared to food. Like we literally have a production right now, and we just got compared to food all the time. I mean, all the time. My first show at East West was called A Nice Indian Boy. It was about an interracial relationship between two men, and the Indian man just wanted to have kind of a big Bollywood wedding. And the number of reviews that compared it to a chicken tikka was like out of control, and there was no chicken tikka in the story.
That's, oh my God, I'm so sorry laughing. That's awful.
Yeah, well, it's just
so
what it is, and it's ridiculous,
It's so
right?
ridiculous.
It's because for white people that's their way into sometimes our culture, right? Is food, right? And so they'll be like, oh, it went down like a good pad thai, and you're like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. I don't compare it to like, oh, that went down like a good Shake Shack. I don't know. It still happens. We just had a show open, and it's in the last few lines of the review. Good intentions aren't enough, so I'm almost done. I have 3 more. Diversity programs provide opportunity and segregate more. So I mean, one of the things that I feel really conflicted about is I'm here because of some of those programs, right? I've done classical directing programs, I've done Spark Leadership, and some of them I've often been the first one. But the trouble with that, so one, they do give you access, but the problem is there's also an implied assumption that you would not be competitive in the regular pool, right? You are not seen in the same way. So you need this special program for you. And so it, again, has good intentions, but there is still kind of fundamentally racist and prejudiced assumptions at work. So it's really challenging, right? So it's, as someone who's gone through them, people ask me about whether they should apply for them, and I can't say that it hasn't had impact. I just say, go in with it eyes wide open.
Right.
Because oftentimes you're also not being set up for success in these programs.
Yes, that's true.
Don't make me choose between being a person of a color versus my gender versus being LGBT versus my being an immigrant, right? Create a space for me to bring my whole self in. So even just because I am at an Asian American institution, I don't prioritize being my culture or ethnicity over my sexual orientation or other things. But oftentimes spaces make you choose or make you rank or make you prioritize those. Sorry. Equity, diversity, and social inclusion work is social justice work. And so the other big bias is that great artistry and work with the social justice component are sometimes viewed, they're not mutually inclusive. And there is a bias against work with a social justice mission that is didactic, that is preachy. Well, what I'm saying is it's going after change. And it doesn't mean that it also can't be great art, right?
Yeah.
Which is oftentimes what they do. Colonialism, right, as I think I mentioned, is still couched, and particularly with our art forms, that's what's really interesting, right? So, the theater as we know it here is a Western idea of theater, and it's based on Western notions. Particularly the big one I talk about is time, right? Western time is linear.
Yes.
Eastern cultures, it's cyclical, right? Most other cultures, it's cyclical, right? So the way we operate, the way we see, we you know what I mean? And so those narratives of time call for different formations of creating structures of art. And I think for the Asian American diaspora, we are still trying to find our mark in a way that I think that African American theater is finding in a really diverse way, right? So you have August Wilson, but you also have George Wolfe, and you have Robert O'Hara and Susan Lloyd Parks, right? And in some ways, there's folks who are fitting into the mold, and then there's folks who are really ripping it apart. But there's kind of recognizable aesthetics, and the same with, I would say, Latino theater with sometimes magic realism. I think Marisol's playing here, and I think Jose Rivera has been really instrumental in kind of bringing some of those changes or being recognizable. Social media is a game changer. In a way that's faster and holding accountability than we've never seen. So right now when theaters announce seasons, right, very quickly, if it's all white male, if there's not a female in it, people are called out. And very quickly, there's that unannounced slot that gets filled by whatever community is not in their season. But, and it has pluses and minuses because oftentimes you're tried in a way that you're, the full story isn't getting out, but it's also leading to immediate accountability in the field. And then there's also these really great watchdog groups. So I'm on the Media Coalition. There's APAC, Asian American Performing Arts Coalition, that releases data every year about Asian American representation, but it kind of hits all minority groups in Broadway and off-Broadway in theaters. And just because you open the door doesn't mean we have to enter. Right? So thank you. I'm glad you excluded us from your institution for decades, and now you want to welcome us in. But why should we go there?
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
Why does that matter? Like,
Yes.
it impacts and helps you, but I don't know if it impacts and helps us.
Right, exactly. Right.
That's it.
I feel like it's so funny because the three of us are up here nodding, and I feel like we're a doo-wop group. Like a native doo-wop group.
We are.
Yes. Tell it, Snehal. Okay. Elizabeth Francis, another Cherokee sister down there, is best known for her on-camera roles such as a troubled girlfriend, Angelica Maryboy in Drunktown's Finest, produced by Robert Redford, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Rock star Bad Penny in the Emmy-nominated series Her Story. NBC's Heartbeat, tough but lovable MMA fighter Lily Rowan on Netflix's Love from producer Judd Apatow. And currently her role as the young and headstrong Prairie Flower on AMC's hit series The Sun, starring Pierce Brosnan. Elizabeth was born on a military base in Okinawa, Japan, and raised in San Diego, California. After receiving her degree from Cal Arts, she immediately began her professional career both regionally and in Los Angeles, working with such notable theaters as Center Theater Group, La Jolla Playhouse, Los Angeles Theater Center, Shakespeare Santa Cruz, Native Voices, and the Kirk Douglas Theater. Recently, Francis has taken on a new role as an executive producer, working with both Through the Wilderness, Blessed Sipaku, First Girl I Loved, on their next feature, Coastin' on E, and writer-director Lisa Donato on her film Foxytrot, which premiered in Vancouver and at Outfest in Los Angeles. After finding mentors on the AMC producing team and partnering up with Zero Gravity, Ozark's Beast of No Nations, Elizabeth began development with co-creator Glenn Stanton on the drama sci-fi show Inherent, along with a comic book of the same name. They will begin shooting a short version in early 2019 with director Trip Reed and producer Margie Templo Parks, along with an all-star cast. Off-screen and stage, she volunteers her time working with youth in arts on reservations and in Los Angeles. Elizabeth Francis.
That's a mouthful.
Mouthful.
Who wrote that? Somebody else wrote that. Hello, hi, I'm Elizabeth Francis. In the sake of time, too, I feel like there's so much that has been said that, like Kim was saying, we're all nodding our heads because, and I see nodding heads out here because we're all here for the same purpose. So I'll just give you a little bit of background from where I'm coming from and entering in from in my own perspective. So I grew up, I was born in Okinawa on a military base. My father was in the Marine Corps. And then eventually we landed in San Diego, North County. And something about that experience, which is a bit different, and I didn't know it was different, is that where I grew up, because of the military, minus politics, because of the military, it was very diverse. It was very inclusive. The environment I grew up in was inclusive in terms of I would outrigger canoe growing up with a bunch of Samoan girls. I would play basketball with every color, race, creed, whatever. I grew up doing theater with people of all backgrounds, sexual orientations. And it was just a time when, and I grew up in a border town. And so growing up that way, I didn't know until I moved to Los Angeles and started this career that wasn't how the rest of the world was. So in a way, I remember leaving CalArts and taking this course at the end, and I'd written this whole paper. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get out. So, we're gonna change the world. And I remember this paper being about how the inclusivity of my environment growing up, that coming into this industry, I'm not trying to do something that is like a pipe dream that, oh, maybe it can exist one day. I'm actually coming in going, no, that's exactly how I grew up. That is exactly how it can exist. And I'm not making up a fairy tale. I think this panel, and you look at this room, and that is inclusive of all parts of me. So every time I do something, it was, DeLanna and Kim and I were talking about this last night, I always, the way that I personally identify is mixed. I'm also in an interracial relationship, so my children will be mixed. And the reason that is important to me is I want to honor the cultures that I came from, but also give my future children the space to have agency. And I think that when we talk about representation in the industry, I think what we're talking about is we are the hyper-realization of power structures. I think that's the way to put it, because there's different kinds of spaces, and there's spaces of, there's money. So there's, someone asked me the other day, I was at a panel, and they said, so what can we do? How do we change things? I'm like, spend your money on what you believe in. We can say all day that we believe in women having power, we believe in inclusive spaces or diverse spaces, but if we don't spend our money there, then the truth is this whole thing is a machine. And we are all in the room to shift that machine, but if I'm being frank, and along the way of becoming an actress, I had various careers to support myself, and one of those was marketing. And working in the marketing world, what I understood was I was working for a business who was trying to sell a product. And the reason I say that is because these machines, these executives are reactive to a thing. The thing they are reactive to is money. And that is the unfortunate truth. And it takes artists to see what that future could be and show them the way, and then for a populace to then support it with their dollar. I agree with everything that everybody said, and I think there's a back and forth that can happen, and talking about writers' rooms, being in boots on the ground, being in spaces where often you are as actors, especially in film and television, and I am of a mixed background. My mom has immigrated from the Philippines, and then if you go into that's Spanish and Chinese and indigenous Filipino. My dad is German, English, and Cherokee. And so when you mix all that together and put it in like a little baby that could only exist in America, someone said to me once, the term like all-American, I was like, well, actually, I'm probably the most all-American thing sitting at this table, because where else could I exist? I mean, where else could we all be in a room together? And so I think it's important to look at those spaces, and I mean, I could sit here all day and tell you all the horror stories of things that I've also experienced, but I think for the sake of this place and this space and this panel, I think it's important to talk about how do we find solutions. So there are safe spaces to say, I know what you went through, I feel the same way. And then there are other spaces to say, okay, so how do we create change? And the truth is that part of that change means finding allies who may not look like me. Finding allies who, I'm on a show where we did have an all-white writers' room and one female. And the way that we made change is, it's not easy, and did it make me angry? Absolutely. Because I thought, man, I just want to do my job. I just want to come to work and do my art and let that be my only responsibility. But that's just not where we are. So what it means is I have to come to work, and I'm also a cultural advisor, and I'm also, a person who raises the red flags, but goes, hey, I'm actually saying this not just for me and my own personal gain or personal triggers. I'm actually here because this is in the interest of all of us. And I think, and I'll just say, white people, people who identify as Caucasian, that there is a fear. I think what both DeLanna was talking about, what Snehal was talking about, is there's a real fear of there is ignorance, and then there's a fear of getting it wrong. And in that fear of getting it wrong, what I found was that fear of getting it wrong actually created the exact result that they were terrified of.
Right.
Because it's about ego. We don't want to be wrong, right? So as a group, we're sort of, unfortunately, therapizing colonization. We're taking our history and we're going, okay, great, so that exists, daddy beat me and this happened, and and it's horrible. And that's one space, and then now we're in a space where we're going, and now, how do we course correct from that? How do we create safe spaces so people can heal from it, but also create artistic spaces where we have agency to shift that narrative? And so I think it's really, important that those are all different spaces. And I just say that because I think working with an all-white writers' room is identifying what specifically we're talking about. And it takes more, it takes more than being like, hey girl, I know, because there's a similar experience.
Yeah.
It takes a little more time, unfortunately, for now, because that's where we're at, and to explain what we're trying to drive at, exactly why, and the pain it causes others and myself. And I find that typically when that's possible, then, as long as they're not a total, I won't curse on this panel, then I find that's the space where we can change from, because it's that human being part. It's that place where we can all go, you know what? I can't identify exactly with your trauma, but I can understand and empathize with it. And if we can start speaking from that place and find the places where we can speak to each other, I think that's where shifts happen. I'm gonna keep going on because there's
Fantastic.
so much to say.
So I know there's several people, you've got to be itching, right, to ask some questions.
Yeah.
And just to kind of get us into that mode of this next part of dialogue. In my language, we have a word called school, and it's that cyclical part you're talking about, and it's basically the Fibonacci sequence, right? So it's the way that the smoke rose and went up through the teepee, through the hole at the top of the teepee, and that life moves in that cyclical way. And it's such an exciting time to be alive, because it's basically like, wow, what was it like when that first contact happened? And you had all of this ancient wisdom and these two civilizations that were meeting, and what could have happened. What if it would have gone well? And I feel like we're at that moment now, that we really have come to consciousness and are excited about what the ancient wisdom, to be honest, that we hold in our DNA, and the way that we see the world, and how we can help everybody move forward, in a good way, especially when we look at the realities that are happening in our physical world.
Yes.
The world that we share, the globe that we share, the water and the air and the land, that we share. So with that, I would love to open it up and just fire away with your questions or comments or insights, and we'll spend the rest of the time doing that.
Don't be shy.
Well, I do feel shy, and I do feel fear, guilt, fear of getting it wrong. As a white person, I'm not a white male, so there's one tick in my benefit. I suppose one of the things that I'm asking, in a profession that is so visually orientated, the first thing that happens is a headshot, then a showreel or whatever. How do we ensure that working safely in this and delicately in this new dialogue that socially, culturally, globally we're going into, that we don't terrify the white male and cause more anger, fear, guilt, because we only have to turn on the news this morning to see the constant suppression of women and people of color all the time. So I suppose in this safe space of this really valuable panel, and I thank you so much, and I thank Donatella and Catherine and yourself, Kim, for bringing it together. How do we make it safe for all involved and ensure that we're not adding more fear?
What is the antidote to fear?
Oh, I mean, I can speak a little bit to this just because I had that experience on my show, and also, and frankly, in the this show that I've been creating, our director is a straight white male, and I will say this is I specifically, it is a time. How do you? I mean, we all take care of ourselves, and that's part of the taking care of the fear. I think there's an individual responsibility, and that's the truth. But also, you have, I think, you know, and tell me what you guys think. I think there's, as people of color, people who are identified as people of color, because it is a visual thing. I think it's important to know that, like, when we talk about race in terms of genealogy, it's very different than we talk about race and representation in terms of we're talking about a visual identification. Those are two different things. I mean, there's a lot of Cherokee people who look way more like you than like either of us, you know? I think in the current setting personally I've had a lot of friends who are actors or directors or say to me, I had someone say to me the other day, who's a straight white male, say, you know what, I just can't get a gig, and this agent said, well, you know, you're a straight white guy, so you're the last person they'd hire. And he came to me and we talked about it because we have a trusting space and relationship. And what I told him is I said, be wary. That is dangerous. The reason that is reckless and dangerous to say something like that is the seed of what becomes hate and prejudice. And the reason I say that is because the assumption behind that statement is A, it was already owed to you, and B, the other assumption is that means someone else is taking it. And the truth is having people of color having more opportunities, or what appear, again, to be more opportunities in the zeitgeist, because we're seeing it more than ever. The truth is the pie chart hasn't shifted that much. It feels like a lot of change to a populace that hasn't had to experience what it is to enter into a narrative that is not their own. As a person of color growing up, I am trained to, I grew up in the 90s, you know, I was trained to watch movies and television of white narratives, and I'm trained to enter myself in and release myself into a white narrative in a way that maybe a person who identifies as white won't watch, you know, Straight Outta Compton and go, I can kind of release and identify into that experience. And so because of that, and it's in the news, and you add politics and everything, it creates fear. And I think maybe part of the solution is for the people, and again, this isn't every person of color. I know that I'm willing to talk about it with one-on-one with people or in safe spaces. But what I told him is I said, be mindful, be wary what it's creating in you and what is the truth and what is the narrative you're being told. And if you don't know what to do with it, don't ask another white guy.
Right.
Ask me. Ask someone like one of us, because we know what it is to be told, when I started, we were talking about this, I saw the Annenberg study that was like an asterisk, and it said, it was a pie chart of like all acting roles, speaking roles, and that asterisk said, there was like how percentages, and it said 0.01%, and it was like Native American, Pacific Islander, and 2 or more races, and I was like, oh my God, that 0.01 literally describes me in every way. And if I had listened to that narrative, if I had used that narrative to define myself, I wouldn't be sitting here.
No.
So why ask people who haven't had to survive a thing how to survive? Don't ask a broke person how I get rich. So in that same way, I'd say this is exactly how you start those, learning how to combat it and going, okay, what do I do with this? And it's frankly like listening and listening. Is that, baby, that's a start?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is it's going to be messy and it's going to be unsafe. And like, look, I don't think we should be afraid of terrified white men because they are terrifying us every day. Yeah. Look at the world we live in.
It's so true.
They have done it for hundreds of years and they continue. And it's not all of them, right? But it's like, we can't coddle. Like, white fragility is a thing, and we have to confront it to be able to move forward, right? It's the thing of like, the note we always tell actors is like, don't be afraid to do, the thing you are most avoiding, unless you plow through it, you're gonna end up doing it, right? That stereotypical performance you don't wanna do because you dance around it, you end up creating it. So, that's what's gonna happen, and it's like, at least, what you can do is create a safe space for that dialogue, or for conversation afterwards, but it's what's going to be there, and that's how we're going to learn and we're going to grow, and it's exactly that. Some people are always going to feel like there's a scarcity model, and others are going to feel like there's a plenty model. You know what I mean? Like there's going to be folks that are like, well, there's limited seats at the table, and if I let you at that, if I let you have a seat, that means I have to back up, or there's going to be less. Versus like, well, let's just upend the table. Let's just throw it around. Let's just sit on it. Like, look at a different way of being. But it's kind of like you have to headlong be able to name it and to confront it, and then go from there.
Name it, tame it.
Yeah.
Name it, tame
And
it.
honestly, you can't run away from those difficult conversations because that's what makes us stronger. That's what creates community, is not shying away from that. And guess what? You're going to make a mistake because you're human. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to put our foot in our mouth at one point and say something we shouldn't. But you don't run away from doing that. You acknowledge your mistake, you apologize for it, and you see how you can move forward. And I feel that's the biggest problem we have in this industry, is that whenever there is a mistake made by the dominant culture, they run away from it. They don't want to keep having those conversations. It's like, oh, we messed up. Let's not, it's too much trouble working with that group. Let's back away from the table.
Right.
And that's what happens. It's like, you can't do that. You have to keep showing up. And I agree with you fully. It's like, as a person of color, as a woman, we're always taught that, God forbid, we offend the dominant culture and say the wrong thing, right? But no one comes to our conversations that way. They're like, oh, I might put my foot in my mouth if I say the wrong thing with this group of people. That's something that's only been happening recently.
Yeah.
Up until recently, there was this entitlement where we can say whatever we want, and if it offends you, well, then don't be so sensitive. Yeah. And so this is the first time that this is actually happening, where people are actually worried about what we think, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a darn good thing. And it's fine. It's about time. And I also feel like, as people of color, we're often we're taught to be quiet. We're taught to educate. If you're the only person of color or the only woman in the room, it's your job to educate everybody. Well, guess what? I'm not getting paid to do that.
Yeah.
My job is to be an actor. But all of a sudden, I'm the only Native woman in the room, and all of a sudden, I'm your cultural advisor that you're getting for free? No, that's not fair. And I feel as people of color, we're always taught to be, oh no, you're the only one in the room, you have to be the ambassador. And that's too much pressure to put on one person.
Yeah.
Because, yes, I know a lot about my culture, but I don't know everything about my people. I'm going to defer to an elder because that's what I was taught. If you come to me and ask me about the Lakotas, yeah, I know some things, but I'm not Lakota. But yeah, as a Native person, when you get hired, we're often hired to play a different tribal nation, and then we're expected to know everything about that nation. And that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it's like, I mean, these umbrellas, like Asian America,
right,
you know, it's like 4 billion people, you know, put one moniker about, you know what I mean? Like, all these different cultures and heritages and traditions get one thing, right? And it's the same thing over, you know, if you're Hispanic or Latino, you know what I mean? Or African American, like, it's just, they just,
Obviously,
they reduce us to these kind of like big tropes and types. And you get less seen and less recognized and less identified.
Yes.
You know, can I ask a question since we're like in this like, hey, back and forth? Who in the room, in terms of like these kinds of conversations, cross-cultural, people of color and white people all together having these kind of conversations, who is afraid of getting it wrong? I mean, I'm afraid of getting it wrong. Who has ever left a conversation and like been like, I definitely put my foot in my mouth a little bit, or like learned something later that was like, oh yeah, that one time I said that thing. So, I mean, that shows you we are all feeling the same way. And I think if we can identify that and go, hey, I'm willing to be together and get it wrong, like that's where we start. That's where we start. I mean, if you think of it in relation, like, I don't know who has a sibling. Me and my sibling fight all the time. You know, we are very different people. But I don't enter into those conversations with my sibling afraid to get it wrong, because I know at the end of the day we love each other and we will forgive. And how do we start looking at each other that way so that we can go, you know what, that triggered me, I was angry, I left, but I'm glad it happened because I'm gonna leave and come back and learn a different thing. It's puberty right now. Like, I think it's that's what it is when in terms of talking about race and situations. Like, it's puberty. We're humping trees and we don't know why. Like, we're just, you know, having these kind of reactions.
Or fighting.
And
And then beating up the tree.
Beating up the tree. We're having these we don't know what to do. It's awkward. There's a pimple. Like, but then I kind of have these feelings and emotions and I don't know what to do with them. And it's puberty. I mean, it's puberty. So how do we do it safely and forgive? Obviously, identifying well-intentioned people. That's a very different thing.
So I'm going to go here. Wow, we got tons of hands. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes, so we'll go quickly, yes? So we've got 4 hands. We'll just kind of start up here and then work our way back. Makeda.
I thank you for a lot of the things that you guys said, some jewels that you put out there. And one thing that you said is just because you open the door doesn't mean I have to walk in. And that holding writers accountable and producers accountable, and me watching the inclusion, it takes me back to blaxploitation.
Right.
And now I feel like there's although we may see more African Americans or black people or Africans, is it for us or against us?
Yeah.
And like really looking at what is out there is the new blaxploitation. You know, some of these shows that are out are toxic. And unfortunately, these are the only things that although there may be independent works happening that are positive and meaningful, they are not getting the distribution and the airplay and the recognition that is really needed and lasting. So how do we start to shift that we can move away from the exploitation of color and the, you know, either it needs to be this tragic story or, you know, something that is so comical that it's, you know, off the wall and not even real. So, you know, if we could just talk about some of that.
I would love to throw something out about that. I think that as storytellers and as folks that are studying story, I think it's incredibly important that we understand that story is medicine. And it's either good medicine or bad medicine. And I think once we understand the power, and now we have neuroscience backing that up. We have the sciences backing that up, as well as economics and anthropology and political science. So we know story changes everything. And I think once we start taking and demanding that responsibility of every storyteller and helping them be aware. Awareness is where it all begins, correct? And educating ourselves. I think once we understand this could change somebody's life, for ill or for good. And understand that before you just throw that out there, brother or sister, transgender just like to understand that story is medicine. It's interesting, Snehal, I was like submitting a new hashtag, be the thorn, and it's like, it's so interesting. What made me think of that was that indigenous peoples around the world used to use thorns as needles to put medicine into the body. And there is a loving way to do that and to put the good medicine in. Sometimes the medicine kills things, right? Kills the things that need to be killed so that the healthy thing can grow. And so that would be what I would submit, is we start thinking about the power of story in that way.
That's so true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting is if you watch how the three main television networks tell stories, and they're vastly different, right? So if you watch something, I'll just say names. So if you watch CBS, right? If you watch something on CBS, you often see people of color with a white person name, and you never see their parents or their siblings or their partners, right? So they've been cast in a certain way, and you don't see anything else about them that makes them that represents that person specifically, right? I think ABC and Disney show it in a little bit of a different way, right? So that oftentimes you'll see someone, I think we were just talking about names, right? I think names is a big way that we are kind of whitewashed, right? In some ways, right? So that you don't see, they're afraid, I just saw this interesting meme where people were like, somehow like a name like my last name is Desai, people can't learn, but they can learn Tchaikovsky, right? Like we can learn to say like these ridiculous Russian names and are expected to know them, but we can't say like a 5-letter, Latino last name or a Hispanic last name. You know what I mean? Like it just is like those double standards are so there, but like, create a person with a backstory and a history and show us their parents and their love interests and their house. And that's some of the ways that we will open it up. I mean, I still think about this horrific review of Julia Cho's Durango, a play. And the last line of the review was like, even though it was the story of an Asian family, it felt universal. And you're like, well, I don't say that about Death of a Salesman, right? I don't sit there about Three Sisters or August Osage County. Like, even though it was a bunch of white people in a house who were doing drugs, felt universal. Like, right? So it just is, but there is these standards, right? And we know through specificity you get universality, but it's just the language is so coded. That's the thing that I hate the most is artistic excellence. And the best, right? That is the biggest code and trigger for me of, well, why is this? Oh, because I wanted the best. I wanted the excellent. Like, why is this all white? Or why is this way? But whose standard of excellence and why? And why is it deemed that way? And what, you know what I mean? What does that mean? You know what I mean? And what are you getting at? So there's just these I think we have to really call those things out in those ways. And recognize, and I think we all want to be the best, right? We all want excellent. And to be viewed in that company, but just because it's that way or it's always been that way or viewed that way doesn't mean it's
Do you mind if we jump to it? There was a woman in the back there. I felt like it was a second hand.
So thank you so much. That's really so much fun. For sharing. Thank you for that. And a lot of this is reminding me of what I love about theater and performance, and not just something that we want, but the way we live in it. So I'm reminded of Angela Davis about something, and she says, that the commitment really is in the experiment and being together. It's not about being right, but being to success and being together and becoming together. So this is what this conversation reminded me of. I was wondering if I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit to one of you made a comment. I just want to really come into my work. So I wanted to hear about what your dream project is. And how we might imagine that together.
Beautiful.
I'm just thinking, like right now, you can do whatever.
DeLanna, you want to start?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So
You look just like,
Sure. Okay. So this is going to sound really cheesy, but I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I love fantasy. My dream project is actually I have a graphic novel I'm working on called Doe Woman. It's based on the Cherokee tradition of the Deer Women, the stories, and so I want to be the first well, I won't say the first, but I want to be a Native American superhero. And so that's what this graphic novel's about, and I've already written the pilot episode for it. And so that's my dream project, is I want sorry, camera. I want a badass Native woman on screen doing badass things. And I would like to be that badass woman.
Could she have a badass big sister? And a badass little sister?
Well, because my people are matrilineal, exactly. There are 3 women in it. I'm just saying. Just put it out there.
I don't know. Just 'cause it goes back. I just want to watch that. I mean, the big thing that I don't know if I have a specific project, but the thing that I'm always fighting for is, or wanting more of, is cultural intersectionality, right? I think our performing arts institutions are the most segregated places in the country, right? And they continue to do that because now there's the Black place lot or the Asian place lot, right? Or the Latinos place lot. And so it's not being like, we're not being welcomed in ways to an institution. And then, I always say, well, where is the piece of work where we're in a room talking to each other? Because that's our world and that's our life, but we don't yet see that represented in most of the art that's being written or produced or being seen. And that kind of work is going to be inclusive of everyone. But it's just, that's the call, I think, for artists right now, is to write with, whether it's cultural intersectionality or it's at the intersection of disability or whatever it is, but like, let's have that cross-section of ideas. And the reality of it is, a lot of this is generational, right? Like, if you know someone below 10, they don't watch anything but YouTube. Like, somehow that's how they get everything. Yes. And, things about like sexual orientation, it's not an issue, right? It's like, you're like, why are you talking about that? You're old, right? Yeah. Like, it's the same with like race, like these are things.
It's amazing.
So it's that, but it's right now what the fear is what are they seeing, right? Like right now, this world that we live in, and this holding on to this, whatever it is, like America of the 1950s, right? Yeah, or this idea of like, be so afraid of change, and I just think that's, we know cycles of violence, it's a cycle of violence, and so that's the only thing, is like, at some point, are we gonna, cause damage that is just gonna keep repeating itself versus moving forward?
Yeah.
Liz, what is your dream?
Oh, my dream. I'm like, oh, actually sort of a like little combo move of everybody. Not sort of, it's actually the comic book that we're creating too. I think that there's 2 sections of like work that, it's funny, as you started talking through the things that I've had the opportunity to do, I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, her story was a trans lesbian rom-com. Like, I got to be in that space. I'm on a historical drama right now. I got to do, I've gotten to enter a lot of spaces, and I'd like to see all of those spaces come together in a way, because that is the world that I live in. So my dream, I definitely want to be a Marvel superhero, because that would just be so cool. But I do in the same way. I had this talk with someone, with straight white male, about the things that I want to see, and why I like sci-fi, why I like the future, why I even like Black Mirror, like these warning signs too. And he said, well, I like history. And I said, well, I like to investigate history, but it wasn't written for me. So I like to redefine history, and the way that we do it is, and actually this kind of goes to your question, is by creating it. That's right. I want to act in and produce, I'll tell you my full-on dream is to have a space where, let's say, Inherent, come on, baby, that it's a comic book that goes out, it goes into like DNA and genealogy, and basically wrapped in a candy wrapper takes the idea of race and turns it on its head, so everyone's like, oh, that's right, we actually are all mixed with something. Yes. And where does it all come from, and how are we all human, and why do we do these things, and generational trauma, and blah, blah, blah. And to take pieces like that and to put them in a space where, I always think this, because we did this in marketing when I worked in marketing, we would take Tom's shoes, for instance. You take Tom's shoes, and they're like, for every shoe you buy, a pair of shoes is donated. And I always think, why aren't we doing that in, television and film makes a ton of money, right? When it makes money. It also loses a ton of money, but when it makes money, it does. And I always think, gosh, what if like 1% of that revenue passed a profit? I mean, just thinking truly of making change. What if like 1% past making your money back of all profits actually went to the thing tangibly that piece is talking about? If we did that, imagine what, I mean.
Story is medicine.
Yeah, story is actual medicine. So we leave emotionally, like, not medicated, that's the wrong word, but you know, we leave emotionally, like, I leave the theater sometimes going, yeah, now I want to do something and I don't know what to do. And my dream is to create projects where I can do my work and that people leave and they also know, like, my money is actually tangibly going to something that shifts that. That's the pipe dream, but that's truly what it is.
It's a beautiful dream.
Yeah.
So I think we're at time, correct? Fantastic. So thank you so much. I know most of you still have questions, so